Welcome back to season 2 of Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. I am your host, Marcia Blaine, a licensed professional counselor, a clinical hypnotherapist, an author, motivator, and life coach. Join us during this season as we begin to normalize freedom. Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. Welcome back to Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. We are coming to an end of season 2. It actually lasted months longer than initially anticipated, but we kept getting requests to be on the podcast, or I kept coming up with subject matter for this year of normalizing freedom. Well, as we enter into the end of season 2, running towards the end of 2023, I decided that I wanted to have this last conversation with the audience regarding the book Worthy. That's right, the book written by Jada Pinkett Smith. I know that she has taken a beating in the public arena about her life and the, flashes of 20-second trailers and things of that nature that have really um, beat up, beat her up, but it really didn't depict her true story. I have listened to this Audible book, I know 5 times, because every time I pick it up and complete it and I go back to it, it's like my spirit is drawn to it because there's so many lessons in there that you can learn and you can apply to your daily life. So a few questions before we begin to start. I begin to start the process of sharing with you my perspectives on Worthy. First question. Where are you in your life that you've allowed yourself to be your most authentic self? How do those around you accept you being in a space of authenticity? Have you ever gone through a period of loss that you were never allowed to grieve? Does others know your true story? Have you ever felt judged because others didn't know your story? Well, that's where we're going to deep dive into today, into the book Worthy. I think, unfortunately, Jada's taken a beating by a lot of people sitting in high places of judgment with low impact on what their true life is. If you actually take the mask off your own life, you may want to take those curtains of judgment down against others. Because if we begin to peel back the mask in your life, I wonder what we'll find. Will we find hurt? Will we find self sabotage? Will we find frustration? Will we find disappointment? Will we find sacrifice? Will we find love? Will we find hopelessness? Would we find separation? What would we find if we took the mask back off of you? The first lesson that I learned in reading the book of Worthy was the cracks in the foundation. And it took me back to understanding Maslow's hierarchy, where safety and security and stability, love and protection, and belonging were. When you think about your childhood, you think about the things that your parents brought into a situation. For Jada, both of her parents were addicted to drugs. Her father was absent most of her life. Her mother was in between sobriety and working to living in the home with the grandparents to being on her own. But the crack in the foundation that you needed for safety and security and belonging and acceptance, it was there. Most of Jada's life was dictated by the little girl needing a balance in her foundation of belonging, the balance in her foundation of being accepted, being cared for and protected, and having spaces of safety. I don't know anyone that could go through many things in life where that foundation is cracked and you say, hey, I came out on top and nothing ever happened to me and I never sacrificed, I never sabotaged or any of that. One of the things that in that process of the cracked foundation, it reminded me that we don't choose the families that we're born into. We acclimate to what those families are, and then we begin to identify or try to identify ourselves in that broken foundation. What I found in thinking about the cracks in that foundation was there was a lack of physical and emotional safety, meaning there were times that uh, Jada didn't feel safe, even in the presence of her mom, because she never knew who she was talking to, mom sober, mom addicted, right? Her grandparents were very vital in Jada's young life because on each side, whether it was the maternal or paternal grandparents, sets of grandparents, they were active in her life as much as they could possibly be, teaching her various life lessons. However, the umbilical cord connection between the mother and then the seed connection with the father, it was unmet. It was unsafe. If there was no security in that process, there was no safety in that process. She wasn't the chosen one. Drugs were chosen. Life was chosen, but she wasn't the chosen or accepted one. Have you ever felt like that? I told a story, and I tell it all the time. It's in my book about a conversation with my mother going through life and feeling like I just wasn't really connected. I was the youngest person in the family, the biological youngest, and I just felt like I was disconnected from everybody else in the family. And I had a conversation with my mother, and I asked her, "Why don't you love me like you love the others, and see me like you see the others?" And she said, without taking a breath, "I didn't want you." And I was an adult at the time that we had the conversation, and of course, I had already began my journey as a therapist when I had that conversation. So I knew how to take a step back for a moment. It still hurt, but I knew how to take a step back and go, tell me why. And when she explained, because my father was physically and emotionally abusive, getting pregnant with me, it was considered like a handcuff to him. Like she was being incarcerated into that life. And part of not wanting me wasn't the physical not wanting me. She didn't want the situation. Once I understood that, I understood the freedom that I needed to be on a journey to find my own happiness. So as Jada was going through this and these cracks and foundations of belonging, you get a sense of when you feel like other people are being treated differently from you. Well, Jada had that sense. She knew that something was off. She knew that she had to make something happen, but she was dealt a hand that a lot of people had to figure out how to survive. So she had to find her safe space. That's lesson number two. What's your safe space? Have you found it? Have you tapped into it yet? Do you even know what a safe space is? Are you emotionally safe with your own self? How do you talk to you? Do you encourage yourself? Do you down talk yourself and demean yourself? Do you take advantage of you? Do you manipulate yourself to be in situations? Are you safe with you? At 13 years old, Jada got a boyfriend and she would sneak out of the house. Her mom was a nurse. She would sneak out of the house at night while she was living with her grandparents to go visit this boy at the local 7-Eleven. He thought, oh my goodness, you shouldn't be here. It's unsafe. Look at this neighborhood, all those kind of things. And yet, because she had that feeling of belonging, she was able to say, I'll navigate it. I'll sacrifice my situation. I'll sabotage the peace of being at home in my bed to come and be with you because I belong. Well, there's a question for you. What have you done to sacrifice that you went against your own word, that you sabotaged yourself so that you could just feel like you belong? What decisions did you make where you may have had people saying that just didn't make any sense? Why are you still there? Why are you still doing this? And all this kind of judgment, but nobody's asking you about your pain. No one's asking you about your trauma. Nobody's trying to understand what you've already gone through. So you have to ask yourself that question. What have I done to find my safe space? Do I even have a safe space? Am I safe with myself? Can I be safe with myself? Can I trust me with me and my decision making? So, as this 13-year-old child was running, trying to identify how to live, she actually learned how to be a drug dealer so that she could help make sure that there was always a home over her head, because after the loss of her grandmother, there was a different level of connection with her mom. She became the adult. So the truth is, she never really had a childhood. She never really got the opportunity to be the little princess child. In fact, one of her earlier experiences that she shared in the book was being in a ballet class, and the teacher, as she was the only Black child in the class, the teacher called her out about a situation and dressed her in Black leotards, as if to say, I see the ugly in you. I see the no value in you. And at that point, her mom did stand up for her, took her out of that class, took her out of that unsafe environment. But yet, Jada was still searching, where do I actually fit? I've been kicked out of this class. I don't fit. I can't say that I fit with my parents because they're choosing drugs over me. I don't fit. So that whole move of safe space, I get it. I get it. We all have to go through something to where we create a situation of a safe space. The third lesson was survival. What does it take to survive in this ugly world, especially being a young person who is trying to navigate a world that isn't the most friendliest toward them? Jada chose to become a drug dealer in the local area because it was fast money. It kept the bills paid. It kept her, in her terms, looking fly. She was able to do a lot of things that she wanted to do, such as, going skating and dancing and things of those nature. I am not condoning being a drug dealer, but I understand the survival of it. I understand what it took for her to really start saying, I can't take a risk and be on the street. I can't take a risk and do this and that. And yes, she encountered some dangers. She encountered some losses. So grandmom lost someone that, was there for her, was shot, right? She couldn't grieve those situations. She had to keep going because stopping to grieve in those moments didn't necessarily equate to survival. It equated to trying to exist, right? Still trying to be on top, still trying to run, knowing that there's more to life than what this is. The third lesson or the fourth lesson, I'm sorry, is trying to find peace in where you belong, understanding that belonging is huge. So, as a drug dealer, everybody had questions about Tupac, and they talked so ugly and demeaning about that situation. But if you actually listened and read the book, you will understand and know that she and Tupac met at a school for the arts, and he had one, maybe two outfits. And so, because they became fast friends, and she was working, she was, of course, um, not necessarily working, but she was selling drugs. She was able to help him and his mom financially. That is what the actual connections were, because you had two people that didn't belong, two people that had gone through their own battles with their parents being on drugs, trying to figure out how to survive in the whole 9 yards. And they stuck together. They were friends. However, as life would have it, the different decisions had to be made. They went down their own roads. Read the book so you can get all the information without judging little blurbs, right? Go out and get the book. Just read the book so that you can have an account from her perspective. Because all these other people showing up, just like me, are giving their perspective of what they think it means, right? So go get the book so that you can hear the full account of what's going on. The blurb that talked about Tupac wanting to marry her, it talks about that in detail in the book, about how he was looking for ways to survive being incarcerated. Okay, well, let me marry somebody. I can have conjugal visits, but they never had that kind of relationship, so that didn't pan out, right? That need to belong, though, is the thing that drove them together, but it's also the thing that drove them apart. That belongingness led them both on two different paths on where it was that they were trying to be. Yes, Tupac went to California first, Jada went after, and then they still began to develop their own lives. But that need to belong kept them linked to a certain degree. You have to understand that if you are in a space of belonging and you're hurting from a lack of emotional safety, you kind of do whatever you need to do to fit in. Trying to find peace through the eyes of someone else or other attachments can also be good and or bad. For Jada, in that belonging, of course, she had other relationships and then she met Will. She brought some of the hurt little girl into the situation where initially he was done before asking to get married. And she talks about the attitude that she had and the reason why she was clinging so much to this one man that was making her feel like she was a priority and that she was protected is because if she didn't cling, she would risk not belonging. She would risk the little girl not being seen. She would risk not being heard, not being cared for, right? And so she had to begin checking herself. She had to go through her own journey. Most of us won't be real enough, long enough to check ourselves, to understand our why. Some of the people, just humanism, have really, really bad attitudes, but they're the ones that's preaching the loudest and saying the most about other people, but they won't check themselves. They won't hold themselves accountable. Won't tap into their own peace. Because if they begin to tap into their own peace, they have to unveil the mask that they've been hiding behind for so very long. We all have had to make some level of sacrifice in our own life. There are always masks that we try to cover up so that no one can see us and no one can hold us accountable to a certain degree. But the way society is now in social media and things of that nature, everyone feels like they're judge and jury. But what's your real story? What's your story? I remember in my own personal life that I got married twice because the church needed me to be married in order for me to be a speaker and things of that nature. The first person that I married was a crack dealer, not a crack dealer, a crackhead. He was on crack. And because of that, and me being a young mother, a single mom, I had to actually act in a manner to protect my children. So during one of his crack episodes, he showed up at the house, wanted to fight. I asked him to leave. He didn't want to leave. He began choking me, things of that nature. And I reached for a butcher block and started just swinging. Of course, the knife made contact multiple times. He ended up in the emergency room. I ended up in jail. And in that process, the detectives were the one that alerted me to the bruising around my neck. And they asked, "How long were you being choked?" And I was like, I don't know. I just needed to survive. I needed to be able to move and survive and make sure I make it for my kids. On the other side, he had crashed, had died, and when they brought him back, he told the doctor before surgery, "You can't let me die. If you let me die, my wife's gonna kill me. I did this. I provoked this. I created this," were the words that were reported to me by the physicians. We were both in survival mode. He was trying to figure out how to live outside of crack. I was trying to figure out how to get away from someone living with crack in their system and that addiction. So from the outside, most people wouldn't know that story unless you knew my life. But I recall how people judged, specifically my family, judged me, made jokes about it, and things of that nature. But they really didn't know the true story. They knew the outcome. They knew what happened at the end, but they didn't know the mental or physical abuse and financial abuse that I was enduring during that marriage. Yes, I made the choice to marry, but I also was manipulated into getting married by the church. I won't go into that. That'll be a whole nother podcast. But I can tell you this, that I could understand how Jada was in that survival mode, needing to do everything that she needed to do and attached to a friend along the way. But then all of the things that was going on in her life, there was so much unhealing as far as grief is concerned. I understand that that grief needed healing. I understand that as they were blowing up as the famous couple in Hollywood, when she said, "I didn't need all of that. I just needed him." When he said, This is what you're getting from me. This is what I'm bringing to the table, because I'm never going to be in a position where I'm hungry or broke or abused or anything of that nature. So their needs were colliding because they didn't know how to belong with themselves and belong outside of themselves in order to invite that connection. And so there was a battle. I remember reading Will Smith's book. If you haven't read it, I would actually tell you to read his book first and then Jada's, because that's going to give you some insight as to even what his own little boy struggles were. That inner child, that young child that had to see the abuse of his mother, the young child that didn't have a voice, the young child that people targeted, and he had to learn to use jokes to escape. You will see all of that in his book. Again, if you hadn't gotten it, you need to go ahead and read it before you continue on this journey of judgment. But to go back to things, one of the things I recognized in Jada's story is there was some unresolved grief, not only from the loss of her grandmother, the loss of a best friend who completed her life, the loss of Tupac, the loss of her dad, a lot of unhealed things because her mask was so tight that she believed she could not grieve. She could not show that level of herself because she was so busy trying to protect herself because she felt like no one else was. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't be. She couldn't exist in that space, right? And because of those things, Will said in his book, he said, I had to tell Jada, I can't make you happy. Go make yourself happy, which was probably the best marching orders anyone could have ever given her, because that gave her permission to go on a journey to get to know her without the trauma, to get to know her without the disappointment, without the need of belonging. Have you even tried to go on that journey? I know I did. And it's not an easy journey to get to. You find yourself having to wrestle to regain the peace within yourself, especially when you never knew peace. You have to regain happiness in yourself, especially when you've never known happiness. A lot of times I ask my clients to define what happiness is that has absolutely nothing to do with anyone else, and they can't. Because a lot of our happiness is really based on what other people think, say, feel, or do in our lives. And that's unfair to you because it leaves you frustrated, disappointed, angry, anxiety filled, depressed. And oftentimes you don't even know where all that energy is coming from. But if you really tap back into the foundation of who you are, you will understand that energy that's coming up and rising up in you because it's triggering something old that's unsettled inside of you. So the thing that I love the most about this book is really recognizing that it's okay to let go and get a redo. I know I know people think that they know the best for Jada and Will, and that, most people say, oh, she's making a fool out of him and things of that nature. Well, the truth is they know each other way more than we know, way more than books or podcasts or interviews can ever share. They know the light within each one of them, and they know what they do for each other. I'm not here to sit in a space of judgment for anyone in anyone's life, but I would ask you, do you know yourself well enough that your significant other knows you as well? Where are you in your own relationship with yourself as well as your significant other? When you get an opportunity for a redo, if that's part of your life's journey, then that's a great place to be in, because in that redo, you could possibly only get a redo if you began healing. Now, I know that a lot of people, they'll get divorced and they'll go back and remarry the same person, and they may do that a couple of times. And the reason why they're having difficulty is because they never stop to heal. When you stop to heal and when you stop to actually identify who you actually are, and you're no longer tolerating just things just to say that you're in a relationship, Because that's one thing that typically happens is people settle in being in relationship when you shouldn't settle. You should not just settle for, oh, this is the way, this is the relationship. I'm supposed to get married. I'm supposed to be this and this and this. No, no. Find your happiness. Take your journey so that you can experience the most authentic part of your existence. I'll say it again. Stop passing judgment. Go out there and get the book if it's one of interest for you. But I can guarantee you a lot of the journey that Jada went on to get to her most healed self now, to her most strengthened self now, most people won't be able to go on that journey because they don't want to face their truth. I would encourage you to recognize that as we're going into the end of 2023, headed into 2024, for those of us that are allowed to transition into the next year, I would encourage you to stop where you are right now. Begin to assess 2023 and identify your strengths, identify your areas of improvement, define what happiness needs to be in your life. Ask yourself, are you battling with any inner child issues, such as belonging and happiness, that you need to work through to heal so that you can be your best self? Give yourself permission to heal. Give yourself permission to love you enough to say, I got to put me first. I got to heal in order for my happy to show up and then it externally flow to others. Thank you so much for your support throughout this year of Authentically Peculiar with Marcia in season 2. I look forward to bringing in new guests in season 3 for Authentically Peculiar. You can find me on any social media under Authentically Peculiar with Marcia, Authentically Peculiar Marcia B on TikTok. You can follow the YouTube channel. You can follow the Facebook channel. Hey, I love to read comments. Leave those comments. Let me know what you think about this episode. Let me know topics that you would like to see come up in 2024 so that we can prepare the season to meet those needs. Go out. Any of the episodes that you would like to see, they're out there on YouTube. I'm loading them on Authentically Peculiar with Marcia on the Facebook page so that you can have access to it. Any of my guests, I encourage you to go out there, follow them, purchase their items, their books, t-shirts, cups, support them, donate to their causes. I don't have people on this podcast just to be having them on. They're bringing a message of freedom. They're bringing a message of hope. And I hope that this episode makes you feel that way as well. Check out marciablank.com for all other information. I'll see you in 2024. Take good care. Good to yourself. Hey, go find your happiness. Bye. Thank you for listening to Authentically Peculiar with Marcia. Follow us on your favorite streaming app.